So let me get started with a story about Chick-fil-A, which I didn't realize we were still talking about all these years later, but somehow it is one of those stories that just pops up everywhere, no matter what, at all times. It's always in the news. And the reason we are talking about Chick-fil-A involves a proposed bill in the state of New York. And let me make some sense of this before I show you the bill itself. The state of New York has a bunch of transportation hubs where trains go, and people are flowing through those locations every day. There's no days off if you're traveling like that. The state also owns the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. So they have to figure out what restaurants can be in those rest areas. And they're kind of opening up the bidding process for different restaurants that may want to open up. And one of the rules that they plan to have for all future locations that are opening up in a bunch of new rest areas is that they have to be open every day of the week. Why? Because people travel every day of the week. What good is it for your business to open up like at one of these rest areas and then say, you know what? We've decided to be closed on these particular days because that doesn't help anybody. So this is the bill I'm going to show you. This is here it is. You can see it at the top. This is from the state's website, blah blah blah. Lots of stuff happening in this bill. But the part I want to show you is this bit right over here, because I know it's a lot of reading, I know it's a lot of small font, but basically there is a company named Applegreen right here. They're the vendor that kind of decides which restaurants are going to open at all of these service areas. And notice what it says right here. Applegreen's portfolio of companies include Chick-fil-A, which by company policy is closed on Sundays and which has already opened its 7 service areas. While there's nothing objectionable about a fast food restaurant closing on a particular day of the week, service areas dedicated to travelers is an inappropriate location for such a restaurant. Publicly owned service areas should use their space to maximally benefit the public. Allowing for retail space to go unused 1/7 of the week or more is a disservice and unnecessary inconvenience to travelers who rely on these service areas. Again, all of that makes perfect sense. They cited Chick-fil-A because it famously is closed on Sundays. Why? Because its Christian founders said, we want to honor the Sabbath, we want to honor God, so we're going to stay closed on Sundays, even if that is bad for business. And that's a thing they've done forever. It's a thing they are famously known for. I should also mention that at several rest areas already overseen by New York State officials, there are 7 Chick-fil-A's already there. They close on Sundays. New York is basically saying, listen, those 7 Chick-fil-A's, Chick-fil-A, I don't know what the plural is, those 7 can keep doing whatever it is they do. This legislation would not affect them at all. What about Chick-fil-A restaurants in the state of New York, elsewhere, like just standing on their own? They can keep doing their thing too. This legislation does not affect any of them. They're just saying from here forward, when we're opening new rest areas and we set up new contracts with new vendors, they got to be open every day of the week, because that's just what the public needs. We're trying to help the consumers. We're trying to get people to take public transportation. It doesn't help us to give you a contract and then you're closed on Sundays. But whatever, keep doing it where you already exist. You just can't do it moving forward. And if you can't abide by that, then you don't get to open up in these rest areas. Just do it everywhere else. So all of that seems perfectly sensible. It seems fine. It seems tailored to customers who are going to travel on Sundays. Um, I don't see anything wrong with that. Notice particularly they are not saying anything about religion in that proposed bill in New York State. This is not like an anti-Christian piece of legislation, because there are other Christian-owned restaurants that are not closed on Sundays. They might be able to open up if they want to go through the bidding process. There's nothing stopping that. If Chick-fil-A wanted to stay open on Sundays in these new locations, they could also be considered to open up in these locations. So nothing about this legislation is anti-Christian. But you know how this is going to play out, right? And I should say, by the way, this has happened before. In fact, in 2015, I'm going to show you this. There was a restaurant, there was a Chick-fil-A restaurant in the Minneapolis St. Paul airport. And this article in the Star Tribune made a lot of news in 2015 because they said the airport, you would also think restaurants at the airport need to be open every day of the week. And that is what their contract says, because planes go in and out on Sundays. We need to help these customers. But for Chick-fil-A, the people overseeing the airport in Minneapolis, St. Paul, they said, you know what? We'll grant an exception to Chick-fil-A. They're allowed to be closed on Sundays. Now, the reason they allowed for an exception here is because they said, well, we're in the business of making money. It's not our job to make sure customers are satisfied. We're a privately owned business here. And the vendor basically said, Chick-fil-A makes more money in 6 days than the rest of these restaurants make in 7. So you know what? If they want to take Sundays off and that's the deal we got to make for them to be one of the airport vendors, we'll take it. And so that was the article back then. In New York State, however, this is a state, we're talking about state-owned rest areas. They got to take care of the public, and that is a bigger priority than whether or not these vendors, these companies make money. Everyone can win here, by the way. It's not like one of them has to lose. But that's why there was that trade-off in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So even if Chick-fil-A can make a ton of money, it's just not helpful to anybody if they're closed on Sundays. And in fact, this is what the sponsor for this bill told news outlets. Tony Simone, the guy who sponsored the bill, said in an interview with CNN that the bill has nothing to do with religion. And he said, yes, I'm saying this, not him, by the way. Chick-fil-A does have a history of being anti-LGBTQ. Its founders have spoken out against same-sex marriage. They spoke out against marriage equality bills. They also donated proceeds from Chick-fil-A to anti-gay organizations. Now, I should say, I think they stopped doing that a few years ago. I don't know if that's still accurate, but they used to for sure. And that's why Chick-fil-A kind of has a rap as being anti-LGBTQ. But the guy who sponsored this legislation in New York said it doesn't matter what their beliefs are, how they operate, if they operate as a Christian company. None of that matters. He said, quote, this is about making sure the throughways have rest stops that support and have our travelers be able to be serviced. This is a consumer protection bill. If every restaurant wanted to operate by Chick-fil-A rules, customers would be screwed on Sundays if they wanted to get food. And what about like truck drivers that need to stop at these rest areas for resting, for sustenance? Like, it's really bad if they don't have options anymore. And you want everyone to play by the same rules. So that's kind of why everyone's getting mad about this. And then, of course, you have Republican lawmakers like Lindsey Graham, who showed up in front of a Chick-fil-A wherever he was. That's not in the airport, by the way. He just went to a random Chick-fil-A and tweeted this. As if the insanity by the left couldn't get any worse, Democrats in New York are trying to force Chick-fil-A to open on Sundays. I showed up to their Manhattan location today while visiting NYC to send a clear message. Hands off our Chick-fil-A. Give me money, join me in this fight. Here's the link. God bless, yada, yada. Okay. I just want to point out he's blatantly lying here. One, this Manhattan restaurant is not anything anyone's talking about. They can be closed on Sundays. No one cares. But also, look at this. Democrats in New York are trying to force Chick-fil-A to open on Sundays. That is a lie. That's not what they're doing. No one is telling Chick-fil-A you got to break your own rules and you got to be open on Sundays. No. I want this to be very clear to everybody. State officials, even if they pass this bill, what they are saying is if you want to operate from here on forward, from here on out, in certain rest areas operated by state officials, then you got to be open 7 days a week. If Chick-fil-A does not want to play by that rule, no one is forcing them to do it. They have thousands and thousands of restaurants. They don't have to be like in those 5 new places. It'll be fine. The question is, do they want to play by the rules that the state is setting or not? And if the answer is no, then that's it. Then they can just keep doing what they do everywhere else and at the 7 Chick-fil-A's that already exist in New York rest areas. No one's saying those have to change their policies at all. So the fact that Lindsey Graham is trying to make this into a thing when no one's complaining about it, I mean, I don't know if that says more about the GOP, guys like him, or whether it says more about how gullible and stupid he thinks Republican voters are, that they would get riled up by this sort of fake propaganda, whatever it is he's doing. Like, none of this is happening. This is what he said to Fox and Friends, Lindsey Graham, I should say. The idea that the state of New York is going to make a company change its policies it's had from its founding. No, they're not. No one's doing that. And then he added, and to the people in New York who are pushing this, you're in for one hell of a fight, said Lindsey Graham to fighters who don't exist because no one is making Chick-fil-A do anything. If they want to operate by their religious rules, and their religious rules do not function in public venues, then the people who own the public venues get to say, okay, then you can't be here. That's it. Our job is to help the public. It's inclusive. We need to set standards that everyone has to follow. If you want to play by our rules, come on in. I'm sure everyone would be glad to have them because they sell a lot of products. People like their food. It's fine. It is what it is. But no one's forcing the chain to do this against their will. There's nothing illegal in this New York bill. There's nothing to rally around. No one's calling for a Chick-fil-A boycott. I mean, not over this. It's just a right-wing grifter using any opportunity he can to cosplay as a defender of Christianity, against the evil forces that, if Chick-fil-A operated by the state of New York's rules at these rest areas, would just make Chick-fil-A more money and not affect the places that already exist, that don't want to play by the rules. Like, how bad are these evil people Lindsey Graham is against that Chick-fil-A would make more money if they did what the lawmakers wanted them to agree to? It's not persecution. If this is the worst they could think of when it comes to Christian persecution, where it helps the Christians supposedly being persecuted, they need to rethink their strategy. One last thing to point out with this story. The guy who sponsored this bill, Tony Simone, this is what he said, responding to Lindsey Graham making a big deal of this. This is to CBS News. Had Graham read the bill, quote, he would know that the legislation would not affect current Chick-fil-A locations. To which I just have to say, like, why are you acting like Lindsey Graham has not read the bill? That's far too generous. Lindsey Graham has absolutely read the bill. He knows what it says. He just doesn't care because Lindsey Graham knows it's easier to whip gullible conservatives into a frenzy over a culture war issue and then raise money off of it than to tell his voters the truth. He's unable to do that. It's why he just flip-flops. It's why he supports Trump. Like, that's a game to him. Telling the truth is not why he's in office. He just wants to whip Republicans into a frenzy because Trump ain't doing it for them. For what it's worth, Chick-fil-A has not said anything publicly about the New York bill, and I don't know why they would either, because New York isn't coming after them. They're doing just fine in New York, and even if this proposed legislation passes, Chick-fil-A will still be doing just fine, so they shouldn't comment. I hope they don't. There's nothing for them to comment on. It's just another example of right-wing bullshittery. I don't know how else to put it.